I got into a taxi thinking it was just a ride home, and didn't realize I was setting off a chain of events where my husband went looking for the man, and none of us walked away unchanged. I used to think infidelity would feel louder. I imagined alarms, guilt crashing through me like glass, shame screaming in my ears, some obvious moment where I'd know I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. But the truth was quieter than that. Softer. It slipped into my life the way fog does, slowly enough that you don't notice until the world looks unfamiliar. It started with a ride home. My husband, Mark, was working late again. He always worked late. Finance had seasons, he said. End of quarter stress. Mergers. Numbers that needed babysitting long after the rest of the city went dark. I stopped arguing about it after year 3 of our marriage, after I realized the arguments never changed the outcome, only how lonely I felt while losing them. So I called a taxi. The driver's name was Daniel. I know this because he introduced himself twice, once when I got in, once again when he realized I hadn't heard him the first time. "You look somewhere else," he said, pulling into traffic. I laughed politely. "Sorry. Long day." "Those are the longest," he replied. That should have been the end of it. Small talk. Weather. Traffic. The radio murmuring something forgettable between us. Instead, the conversation stretched. Not in a flirtatious way, not yet, but in that rare, gentle way that makes you feel briefly understood by a stranger. He didn't ask invasive questions. He didn't push. He just listened. I told him I worked in interior design. He told me he used to be an architect before his firm folded. I told him my husband worked too much. He nodded like that wasn't new information, like he'd heard that sentence 1,000 times before and knew exactly where it came from. When we reached my building, I hesitated before opening the door. That alone should have scared me. Instead, I said, "Thanks for the ride." He smiled in the rearview mirror. "Anytime." I watched his taillights disappear before I went inside. That night, Mark came home after midnight. He kissed my forehead while I pretended to sleep, his suit smelling faintly of someone else's cologne and exhaustion. I lay awake long after he started snoring, thinking about the quiet way Daniel had said anytime, like he meant more than just driving. I told myself it was nothing. The second ride happened 2 weeks later. I could have taken the subway. I usually did. But it was raining, the kind of rain that feels personal, soaking through your coat, your shoes, your resolve. I opened the taxi app without thinking. When Daniel's name popped up, my stomach dipped. He recognized me immediately. "Interior designer," he said. "Same building, right?" I smiled. "You remember." Hard to forget someone who looks like they're always thinking about something they won't say. That should have been my cue to shut down. Instead, I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. That ride felt shorter than the first. Or maybe I just didn't want it to end. By the 4th ride, we were no longer strangers. By the 6th, I was timing my departure so I could call when he was likely on shift. By the 10th, I noticed when he shaved, when he didn't, when his voice sounded tired instead of calm. Nothing physical happened for months. That's the lie I tell myself when I want to feel less guilty. As if betrayal only counts once skin touches skin. As if intimacy doesn't begin long before that. Mark didn't notice at first. Or maybe he did and didn't know how to name it. I was quieter. My phone never left my side. I smiled more. A detail he commented on once casually, like it was a good thing. "You seem happier lately," he said over dinner. I nodded. "Work's been better." Another lie delivered smoothly enough to pass. The night it finally happened wasn't dramatic. No rain. No music swelling in the background. Just exhaustion and opportunity lining up at the wrong time. I'd stayed late at a client meeting. Mark texted that he'd be even later than usual. I called a taxi without checking the name. It was Daniel. "I was hoping it'd be you," he said. And this time there was no pretending it was innocent. We sat in silence longer than usual. Not awkward, charged. Every red light stretched. Every green felt rushed. When he pulled over outside my building, neither of us moved. "You don't have to go yet," he said quietly. I should have said no. Instead, I asked him to drive. We didn't go far. Just circled. Talking turned into touching the space between words. Touching turned into something else entirely. Something I had rehearsed resisting but never rehearsed refusing. I won't dress it up. I won't pretend it was love. It was escape. For a brief, reckless moment, I wasn't someone's wife waiting at home. I was just a woman in the backseat of a car, desired and unburdened by history. When it was over, the silence felt heavier than before. "I can't do this again," I said immediately. Daniel nodded like he'd expected that. "I know. But we both knew that wasn't true." Mark noticed the change after that. The real one. Guilt has a smell to it, I think. Or maybe it's a sound. The way you hesitate before answering simple questions. The way your eyes flicker when there's nothing to hide except everything. I tried to end it. With Daniel. With the secret. With the version of myself I didn't recognize anymore. But endings are harder than beginnings. Especially when someone else knows the worst thing about you and doesn't flinch. The night Mark asked, "Is there someone else?" My heart didn't race. It sank. Because somewhere deep down, I knew this story wasn't just about what I'd done. It was about what he was going to do next. The first thing I noticed was how quietly Mark changed. Not anger. Not shouting. Not slammed doors or accusations hurled across the kitchen like knives. Just a subtle recalibration. The way a man adjusts when something inside him has tipped out of balance, and he's trying to understand which way is up. He started watching me. Not obviously. Mark was too controlled for that. It was in the pauses. The extra second before he answered me. The way his eyes lingered when I said I was taking a cab instead of the train. The way he reached for my phone one night to check the weather and froze when a notification buzzed. I felt it immediately. That cold, sinking awareness that the ground beneath a lie has begun to shift. "Everything okay?" I asked too casually. He looked up, soft smile, the one I trusted for 8 years. "Yeah. Just tired." We were both lying now. I tried to end it again, for real this time. I texted Daniel that night, my fingers shaking so hard I mistyped twice. "I can't do this anymore. My husband knows something's wrong. Please don't contact me again." 3 dots appeared almost instantly, then disappeared, then reappeared. "I figured this day would come," he wrote. "I won't make it harder for you." Relief washed over me so fast it almost hurt. I blocked his number immediately, like sealing a wound before I could change my mind. I told myself that was it. That the worst thing I'd ever done was finally behind me. But secrets don't end when you stop feeding them. They end when they're exposed. Mark started coming home earlier. First, I thought he was trying to reconnect. Cooking dinner. Suggesting movies. Touching my lower back in passing. Gestures that once felt loving but now felt like questions I didn't know how to answer. One night he poured us wine and asked, "Do you still love me?" The simplicity of it gutted me. "Yes," I said immediately. That part was true, in the way old love is true, deep, familiar, heavy with memory. He nodded slowly, like he was checking something off an internal list. "Okay." That was the night he started looking. I didn't know it then. I only learned later, after everything fell apart, how methodical he'd been. How careful. How patient. Mark wasn't the kind of man who exploded. He was the kind who gathered facts. He checked our phone bill, credit card statements, ride histories, patterns, times, names. He didn't confront me because he didn't want my version of the truth yet. He wanted the truth that existed without me shaping it. I noticed the questions creeping in. "Why don't you take the subway anymore? Did you always get home this late on Wednesdays? Who's Daniel?" That last one slipped out too casually. Like an afterthought. Like he wasn't watching my face as closely as he was. I felt my body react before my mind did. A micro-flinch. A hitch in my breath. "Just a driver," I said. "Why?" He shrugged. "His name shows up a lot." The room felt smaller. The walls closer. "I guess I just got used to the same route," I said, hating how practiced I sounded. Mark studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded again. That nod would come to haunt me, the way it wasn't agreement so much as acknowledgement. After that, the silence between us grew teeth. He stopped asking questions and started disappearing. Not to work. He'd say he was meeting an old friend, running errands, clearing his head. He kissed me goodbye like always, but there was something absent in it, like he'd already left in some way I couldn't follow. I started sleeping badly. Every sound jolted me awake. Every late-night car passing outside made my heart race. I imagined Mark following the wrong man. Imagined mistakes I couldn't undo. I considered confessing. The words lined up in my head late at night, heavy and sharp. I cheated on you. I'm sorry. I don't know why I did it. Please don't leave me. But I never said them. Because part of me knew, once spoken, they would become something alive between us. Something that couldn't be put back. The night I realized Mark wasn't just suspicious, he was hunting, came on a Tuesday. I came home to an empty apartment. No note. No text. Just the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the hallway, like a ghost of his presence. On the kitchen counter sat my phone. Face up. Unlocked. My stomach dropped. He'd never invaded my privacy before. Never needed to. The fact that he had now felt worse than if he'd screamed. My phone buzzed in that moment. An unknown number. I stared at it for a full minute before answering. Hello. Silence. Then breathing. Controlled. Familiar. I know who he is, Mark said. The sound of my name in his mouth like that, stripped of warmth, made my knees buckle. Mark, I whispered. Please come home. I will, he said. After I finish something. What? My voice cracked. What are you doing? Another pause. I could hear traffic in the background. A city alive and indifferent to the fact that my life was breaking open. I just want to talk to him, he said calmly. Too calmly. Man to man. Fear flooded me then, real fear, sharp and undeniable. Please don't, I said. This is my fault. Whatever you're thinking. I'm not thinking, he interrupted. I'm done thinking. The line went dead. I slid down the kitchen cabinets until I was sitting on the floor, arms wrapped around myself like I could hold the world together if I just squeezed hard enough. I didn't know where he was. I didn't know what he would do. I only knew that the man I loved was on his way to the one man I hoped he'd never meet. And whatever happened next would be something none of us could take back. There is a particular kind of waiting that feels like punishment. Not the impatient kind. Not the foot-tapping, clock-watching kind. But the kind where every minute stretches until it hurts. Where your mind fills the silence with things you wish you didn't know how to imagine. That night I waited. I sat on the couch without turning on a light, my phone clenched in my hand like it could anchor me to the present. Outside, the city hummed on cars passing, sirens somewhere far away. The indifferent rhythm of other people's lives continuing uninterrupted. Mark didn't come home. At midnight I texted him. Please, just tell me you're okay. No reply. At 1 a.m. I called. Straight to voicemail. I left a message I barely recognized as my own voice. Mark, I'm scared. I know I don't deserve to ask you for anything right now, but please don't do something you can't undo. When I hung up, I realized my hands were numb. I thought about Daniel, where he might be, what he might be doing. Whether he'd noticed someone following him, watching him the way Mark had started watching me. The thought made my chest tighten, not with longing but with dread. I didn't want either of them hurt. I didn't want this collision of worlds I'd kept so carefully separate. I tried to sleep. I couldn't. At some point near dawn, Mark finally came home. I heard the door before I saw him, the soft click of the lock, the measured way he closed it behind him. When he stepped into the living room, his face looked older. Not tired. Hardened. Like something had settled into place behind his eyes. You found him, I said. It wasn't a question. He nodded once. Yes. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady. Is he okay? Mark looked at me, then really looked at me, and for the first time since this started, there was something like pain in his expression. He's alive, he said. If that's what you're asking. Relief and horror tangled inside me. What did you do? Talked, he replied. I almost laughed. The word felt absurd given the tension crackling in the room. You don't look like someone who just talked. That's because conversations change things, he said quietly. Especially honest ones. I waited for him to explode, to yell, to demand answers. Instead, he took off his jacket and folded it carefully over the back of a chair, like he was still pretending this was a normal night. He didn't know about you, Mark continued. Not the way I expected. He knew you were married, yes, but he didn't think he mattered. He thought he was temporary. Shame burned through me. Daniel had been right. It hadn't been love. It had been convenience, escape with an expiration date. I told him who I was, Mark said. I told him what he took from me. I swallowed. And what did he say? He apologized, Mark replied. Over and over. Said he never meant to hurt anyone. Said he'd disappear if I wanted him to. And? My voice barely held. And I told him disappearing wouldn't fix what was already broken. The room felt suffocating. Mark, please. If this is about punishing him. It's not, he interrupted. Not the way you think. He sat down across from me, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's about understanding. That scared me more than anger would have. He explained then how he'd followed Daniel for days before confronting him. Learned his routes, his habits, the quiet routines of a man just trying to get through his life. How ordinary he'd seemed. I wanted him to be a villain, Mark admitted. Someone easy to hate. But he wasn't. Tears slipped down my face unchecked. I never meant for any of this to happen. I know, he said. And then softer. But it did. There was a long silence after that. The kind where words feel like they'd only make things worse. What happens now? I finally asked. Mark leaned back, exhaling slowly. Now you tell me everything. Not to punish you. Not to hurt you. But because I can't live in the dark anymore. I nodded. I owed him that much. Maybe more. I told him about the first ride. The fog. The way loneliness had softened my boundaries before I realized they were gone. I told him about the back seat, about how it wasn't love but it wasn't nothing either. I told him how ashamed I was, how scared I'd been of exactly this moment. Mark listened without interrupting. When I finished, my throat felt raw, my body hollowed out. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, he said finally. But I don't want to hurt anyone else because of what you did. Something in his voice shifted then. Not relief, not forgiveness, but resolve. I won't see him again, he continued. And he won't see you. That part is done. I nodded quickly. I blocked him. I swear. I know, Mark said. I checked. Of course he had. He stood and walked toward the bedroom, stopping in the doorway. Revenge doesn't bring peace, he said without turning around. But truth might. That night, we slept in the same bed, separated by an invisible line neither of us crossed. And as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I realized something terrifying. Mark hadn't hurt Daniel. He hadn't yelled or threatened or destroyed anything tangible. Instead, he'd taken something from him far more unsettling, the illusion that this affair had ever been harmless. And I didn't know yet what he was going to take from me. The days after the truth came out moved differently. Time didn't pass so much as it pressed down, heavy, deliberate, like the air before a storm that refuses to break. Mark and I existed in the same space but not the same reality, orbiting each other with careful distance, learning the new shape of our marriage one quiet moment at a time. He didn't punish me. That was the hardest part. There were no raised voices, no slammed doors, no list of demands scribbled out like a contract for my redemption. Instead, there was restraint. A calm so measured it felt like standing in a room where something had already shattered and been swept away before I arrived. Mark started sleeping lightly. I could tell by the way he'd jolt awake at small sounds, the way he sometimes stared at the wall long after I'd turned my back. He wasn't angry in the way I expected. He was grieving. And grief, I learned, is quieter than rage. We talked. Carefully. In increments. Sometimes only 10 minutes at a time before one of us needed space. He asked questions I answered honestly, even when honesty scraped at my insides. Did you love him? No. Did you think about leaving me? No. Did it make you feel alive? That one hurt the most. Yes, I admitted. But not because of him. Because I felt invisible. Mark nodded, eyes distant. I never wanted to make you feel that way. I know, I said. That's why I didn't say anything. I didn't want to sound ungrateful. We both sat with that. The cruel irony of silence breeding the very thing it's meant to avoid. A week after his confrontation with Daniel, Mark told me he'd seen him again. My heart dropped into my stomach. You said you were done. I am, he replied. This was different. He explained how he'd run into Daniel accidentally, or maybe not accidentally, at a gas station near the edge of the city. How they'd recognized each other instantly, like two men bound by something neither had asked for. He looked scared, Mark said. Not of me. Of himself. I closed my eyes. What did you say? I told him he doesn't get to be a chapter in our story anymore, Mark replied. And that if he ever contacts you again, I won't come looking for him next time. The calm certainty in his voice sent a chill through me. That was your revenge? I asked quietly. Mark considered the word. No. That was closure. For him maybe. For me the reckoning was just beginning. Friends noticed something was off. Not enough to name it but enough to ask questions. I dodged them all. Smiled. Said we were tired. Busy. Working through things. All true, none complete. At night, guilt crept in when the lights went out. I replayed moments I could never unlive, the choice to get into that car, the choice to stay, the choice to believe I could step outside my life without consequences. One night, Mark asked me something I hadn't prepared for. Do you want to stay married to me? The question landed gently but left bruises. Yes, I said immediately. If you'll still have me. He nodded slowly. Then understand this. Staying won't be easy. I don't trust you yet. I might not for a long time. And I won't pretend I do just to keep the peace. I don't expect you to, I replied. I just want the chance to earn it back. Mark looked at me for a long time, the kind of look that measures not words but endurance. Okay, he said finally. Then we rebuild. Or we find out we can't. That was the deal. No guarantees. No promises. Just work. Weeks turned into months. Therapy. Painful conversations. Small gestures that mattered more than grand apologies. I gave him passwords. Access. Transparency I should have offered long before it was demanded. Slowly something shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but stability. A sense that the ground was solid enough to stand on again, even if it still bore cracks. One evening as we walked home together, Mark reached for my hand. The gesture startled me with its normalcy. I don't hate you, he said suddenly. Tears welled in my eyes. I know. I don't hate him either, he added. Which scares me more. Why? Because anger would be easier, he admitted. But this forced me to look at myself too. At what I missed. At what I assumed instead of asked. I squeezed his hand, overwhelmed by the grace in his words. A grace I hadn't earned but was being given anyway. That night, lying beside him, I realized revenge had come and gone without bloodshed or spectacle. It arrived as understanding, as restraint, as the choice not to destroy what was already wounded. But forgiveness, real forgiveness, still hovered just out of reach. There's a moment after disaster when you realize survival isn't the same as salvation. Mark and I survived. That much was clear. The house no longer felt like a crime scene. Our conversations no longer sounded like depositions. We ate dinner together again. We laughed. Cautiously at first, like people testing ice after a long winter, listening for cracks. But survival leaves residue. It leaves questions that don't demand answers right away, only patience. It leaves scars that don't ache every day, but remind you they exist when the weather changes. Months passed. Spring crept into the city, softening edges, coaxing people back outside. We started walking together again in the evenings. No destination, just movement. Sometimes we talked about the future. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. One night, sitting on the fire escape with cheap wine and the hum of traffic below, Mark said something that changed everything. I don't think about him anymore. I turned to him, searching his face. Really? He nodded. Not in anger. Not in curiosity. Not even in comparison. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief exactly, but gratitude. What do you think about? I asked. He stared out at the city lights. Us. And whether what we have now is enough. The honesty stung, but it didn't wound. It might not be, I said softly. And if it isn't, I don't want to trap you here because of guilt. Mark looked at me then, not the way he had before everything broke, but not with distance either. Something new lived in his eyes now. Something steadier. Hard-earned. I don't want to leave, he said. I just don't want to pretend we're the same people we were. We're not, I agreed. I don't think that's a bad thing. That was the night we stopped trying to return to what we'd been. Instead, we asked a different question. What can we become now that the illusion is gone? Trust rebuilt itself slowly. Not as blind faith but as informed choice. Mark trusted me not because he believed I'd never hurt him again, but because he believed I would speak before silence turned poisonous. And I trusted him, not to always understand me instinctively, but to listen when I finally used my voice. We learned new habits. Weekly check-ins that felt awkward at first and then essential. Therapy that peeled back layers neither of us had known how to name. Conversations about desire, loneliness, resentment. All the things we once assumed love alone would fix. 1 year after the night Mark found Daniel, we stood in the same kitchen where I'd once slid to the floor in fear. "I don't regret staying," Mark said. "But I don't forgive what happened either. Not completely." "I don't expect you to," I replied. He smiled small real. "That's why I think this works. Sometimes I still think about the taxi. Not with longing. With clarity. I think about how easy it is to step into someone else's life when you feel unseen in your own. How danger doesn't always announce itself with flashing lights. Sometimes it arrives quietly, offering exactly what you think you're missing." Mark never took revenge the way I feared. Instead, he chose the harder path. Restraint, reflection, and the slow reclaiming of his dignity. In doing so, he forced me to face mine. We're still married. Not because we pretended the damage didn't happen, but because we refused to let it be the final definition of us. And if there's one truth I carry forward, heavier than shame but stronger than regret, it's this. Secrets don't protect love. Only courage does.